our first plenary speaker in the session is Bożena Zuganova from the University in Bratislava, who is a specialist in computational linguistics, semantics and morphology.
Some aspects of
yes, and you'll be talking about the aspects of some aspects of medical English terminology. So,
good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good. My name is Bożena Zuganova, and at the beginning I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. You presented me as from Comenius University. I have to specify that Comenius University has two medical faculties. One is medical faculty in Bratislava, and the other is Jesenius Faculty of Medicine in Martin. Martin is a small town on the north of Slovakia, and in 1960s in Slovakia there was huge lack of doctors, physicians. So the Bratislava University, the Comenius University, decided to establish another university a little bit far away from the center. So we are 200 kilometers from the center, and we are something like university within university. And at this university I have been teaching medical English and also medical German. These are two languages that are offered to our students. They have choice to choose one of them, and then it becomes their obligatory subject. They have to finish. I have been teaching for 27 years, so first of all, I am a teacher. My presentation will be more from didactic and teaching viewpoint, yes, than scientific or not so much focused on translatology, more on the basis of terminology, because our students have to manage medical terminology. And now you imagine you are first year medical students on one of the medical terminology classes. So I try to give you a review of what's medical terminology. Medical terminology is as old as the mankind itself. The spoken language is older layer of medical terminology. The written layer is traced back to 5th century BC. It was in the time of a golden era of Greek medicine. But I want to speak about all centuries, how it developed. I jumped to English, medical English, and or sometimes called also English for medical purposes, which is traced back to 1960s, 1970s. It developed within English for special or specialized purposes. Later it was put to English for academic purposes, or English for occupational purposes, or English for academic animation, professional purposes. Nowadays it's put into international scientific language, yes. ESP started with study of lexicon, and later focused on genre analysis and discourse analysis. A lot of books were written on this topic. It became subject of academic teaching, yes, and Later, training courses were organized for professionals. Many journals appeared, and also conferences were held. Now we can say that medical English or English for medical purposes is so large that it can become a field of linguistics, because it's not just one type of terminology. It started to develop into independent branches. So we have, for example, English for nurses, English for paramedics, or English for medical practitioners, English for dentists, or English for healthcare purposes, etc. In many cases they overlap, but in other they are quite different. Yes. EMP is applied in communication between patients and physicians, everyday discourse about illnesses and diseases. A lot of was written, a lot of literature appeared on medical topics, and these books were used as for education of future doctors, or special books for doctors, and also doctors write a lot of papers as a result of their research, where they want to share their knowledge with other scientists in the world. And so many journals, online and offline journals, appear every day, every time. It's approximately 95% of medical papers that come from English-speaking countries. It's your statement. Because medical discoveries are described and published, first of all, in English. Even the national medical circles try to publish their research results in English. So is the case with Slovak journal. They prefer to publish articles in English. And this has consequences that Slovak medical terminology doesn't develop or stops. Yes. Or everything is taken and translated from English. Progress in medicine is huge. In the last century, it developed. Internal medicine meant for students just one subject. Nowadays, you can imagine how many specialties or specialists are working or dealing with our internal diseases. It's cardiology, endocrinology, gastroenterology, etc. And daily new devices, new treatment methods are developed, new procedures. The last one, ablation, I haven't heard, or I didn't hear till October when it was performed to my husband. It's treatment of arrhythmia through veins. They can treat it. New diseases develop. Yes, we have developed, and no, they're discovered, and they needed to be named. So, for example, Ebola, that was maybe 10 years ago, a huge influence or huge transport of Ebola from Africa to other countries, or avian flu, swine flu, etc. In medical English, 89% of all technical terms have Latin or Greek roots. New words which arise every month are created or are coined from these same roots. Also, it seems that the number of new terms is enormous. I don't know if he or she is read Jamal, but she, yeah, good, excellent. She commented Julian Green's observation on disproportion between thought and words by the statement, while science flies, its terminology just walks. It means it's a pace that lags far behind the scientist, and Jamal says, no, he said about thought and words, and she applied it into terminology and science. Terminology is a linguistic discipline which studies, analyzes, and describes a specialized area of the lexicon. The aim of terminologic studies is standardization of terms so that they are used uniformly. Terminology is based on the knowledge of linguistics. Different non-linguistic disciplines, mainly lexicology, lexicography, and morphology. A linguist who deals with a concrete area of terminology, structure, and meaning, plus has to possess basic background knowledge of the studied discipline. What's the situation in medical English? We can observe two completely different phenomena. It is very precisely worked out and always internationally standardized anatomical terminology, and a quickly developing clinical terminology in all branches of medicine. There is certain chaos, as to be said, yes. There are some attempts to unify it, but the development is so fast that it's impossible. Here are two main, I can't say books, but two main sources the doctors should follow. It is Nomina Anatomica, as for anatomical terminology, and International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems for Clinical Medicine. Maybe some terminology or terms need to have certain features. It is they should be unambiguousness, exactness, stability, word formation potential, and lack of emotionality. But emotionality expressed in diminutives do appear in medical terminology. For example, cerebellum is diminutive. Overlapping in these basic features means or leads to various interconnected relationships among the words. This is, for example, synonymy, polysemy, then hyponymy, hyponymy, etc. Main sources of English medical terminology. First of all, it is Greek and Latin. Later, it was French, and not only French words found way to English, but also French was used as a medium to convey Latin terms into English. These are, for example, superior, inferior, male, female. These are all words or all terms penetrated into English via French. There are just a few terms of Italian origin, like belladonna, influenza, varicella. Arabic influence, it's interesting, it's alcohol, alchemy, alkali, nitrate, etc. Alcohol is not allowed in Arabic countries. Current medical terminology may be divided into main parts. As I mentioned, it is anatomical one based on Latin and clinical one based on Greek. English medical terminology is so dependent on Latin and Greek one that a good acquisition of EMT requires at least basic knowledge of Greek Latin terminology. I have to mention that our students have Latin terminology compulsory, and plus combined with classes of anatomy plus English medical terminology, so they manage it quite quickly. Let's go a little bit to history. Greeks in medical terminology, the founders of scientific medicine and terminology were ancient Greeks, yes. The father of Greek medical terminology was Hippocrates, and he refused magic words for describing diseases and insisted on clear and exact terms. Some of them, for example, arthritis, nephritis, pleurisy, etc. A lot of simple Greek words are Greek root words are used in everyday English without our realizing their origin. Just to quote some of them, acne, basis, chaos, character, criterion, dogma, horizon, stigma, thema, etc. Most of Greek medical terms came into English in a Latinized form. It means with Latin ending on spelling. So bacterium became bacterium, and here we can notice irregular plural, bacteria. Sometimes appear in writings bacteria, E at the end, but it's wrong, it should be bacteria. Bronchus, bronchi, it's from Greek bronkos. Carcinoma is, you see, is very old disease. It comes from Greek origin, and coma as well. Many Greek terms assimilated. Here you can see some examples. I won't read all of them, but you can see the spelling differs, not diaphragma, but diaphragm. This is the most difficult for our students because they tend to pronounce it as it is in Latin, not as it is spoken in English. Here you can see that only partially Greek terms are used as adjectives, not as nouns. The oldest layer, the organs, are in English because they are quite common parts of the human body that had to be named from the very beginning. So we have brachium, but we have brachial, yes, arm brachial. It has no disease because it's no brachialitis possible. Dermal, dermatitis, yes, from skin. 500 or more, beginning of the 1st century, 2nd century, the Romans took over the medical knowledge from the Greeks. They translated and rewrote the Greek books. Celsius is the founder of the Latin medical terminology. Latin was missing a lot of terms, so they just borrowed it from Greek, as we do with English terms nowadays. And many Greek terms were Latinized. Yes. From linguistic viewpoint, we can see that some Latin terms preserved their original form as abdomen, appendix, aorta. Just the pronunciation is English. Similar assimilation happened also with Latin terms into English. So here we can see a few examples. They don't need any any definition, muscle, mandible, oil, pump, pulse, vein, nerve, puncture, etc. Here we can see also the same process as with Greek terms, that only adjective was taken from the original language. Lungs, but we speak about pulmonary diseases, mouth, oral diseases. Yeah. Also. It's interesting that some words experienced multiple assimilation. Here we can see diet, for example, rheumatic diseases or spasm, surgeon. It's interesting, I can't pronounce it in all these languages, just in English. Another layer are neologisms from Latin elements. The first ones are diminutives, yes, cerebellum, bronchiolus, clavicula, papilla, and others, yes, normal terms. Next, mixed sources. Again, one organ is in English, also organ in Latin, disease in Greek, adjective either Latin or Greek. The one example from all: breast, mama, mastitis, mammary glands. Structure of medical terms, mostly they are one-word terms, or nowadays is tendency to describe to use multiple words, phrases, or descriptive terms, yes. And these one-word terms can be simple, underived words, derived words, compounds, or combination of derived or compound words. Drost and Zajicke consider derivation and compounding for the basic word formatting base. How do we form new terms? Either we coin new names or new meanings from the existing ones, or we just borrow words from other languages. The other linguists, they describe the ways of formation as morphological ways, as I mentioned, the derivation, compounding, or abbreviations. Syntactic way, these are collocations and descriptives, or semantic way, narrowing the meaning of common words, metaphoric or metonymic transfer of the previous meaning. The last very large group are long words, yes, from other languages. Last group, I mean, large group, I mean in Slovak language, not in English. There are not so many long words, or when I take away the Greek, Latin words. So here we have a little bit about derivation. We know the students had to learn many prefixes, roots, and suffixes to be able to use the medical terminology flexible. For example, the gastroenterology, we have root, gastro meaning stomach, entero means intestine, and logy is the science. Yes, the science studying stomach and intestines. Compound words, they may be written as two words. In German, it's a situation quite clear. We distinguish easily what is the compound word, because it's written in one unit. In English, it can be two words as blood pressure, or written with hyphen, for example, collarbone, or as one word, eyeball. Yeah, the rules are not so strict, because one time we find it as lifespan, separate words, or lifespan with hyphen, or gallbladder, separate words, or gallbladder, one word. This is situation with prefixoids and suffixoids. These are roots of previous words that became suffixes or prefixes, but they are not used as words anymore. They don't exist as independent words. So we have myo, hemo or hemato, hematology, or tomy means cutting is anatomy, and they work only in combination with the appropriate suffix or prefix. English likes to describe in the term, so descriptive terms arose, yes. For example, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Then it's too long, then they make initialism. In this case, it's acronym spoken as one word. Here we go to abbreviations. The graphic abbreviation, they are common from common language, G for them, H for our, etc. Then we have graphic and phonetic ones, GP, for example, general practitioner, or acronymic ones like AIDS, and a lot of initialisms. These initialisms may be developed also randomly if the writer uses, so he explains it in the first chapter and then can use a lot of abbreviations in the whole textbook. Polysemy and synonymy, it's unwanted and unwished area, unwished field, but it appears from the very beginning. These examples are taken from Latin or Latin Greek terminology. Already at that time existed polysemic expressions like suture. It can be either suture, union of bones. Yes, we have sutures here on the head. Yes, stitch in surgery, and raphe in soft tissue, skin, muscles, soft structures. Another example is hollow. It can be cavity, sinus, cavern, or antrum. Synonymy. Why synonymy develops? One of the reasons are ethical reasons, not to speak too openly in front of the patient. Cancer and tumors were substituted with the term carcinoma for a very long time, but nowadays the patients know what carcinoma means. So we prefer, or doctors prefer, to speak about neoplasm or growth or neoplastic figure, not to tell the patient straight on that he has cancer. Synonymy can be seen on the level that foreign Greek Latin term can be replaced with another Greek Latin term. For example, erythrocyte, which can be replaced with normocyte in some texts. It means in which area it is used. Erythro means red blood cell. Normal, it is normal development of the site. Then synonymy is on the level Greek Latin term and equivalent, English equivalent to this. For example, cranium and English equivalent is skull. Cranium is used for professional purposes, skull is colloquial. Here is a mixture, then one Greek Latin term can have more English terms. For example, these erythrocytes can be called red cell, red blood cell, red corpuscle, red blood corpus. Advantages of Greek and Latin, these two languages are dead. It means there is not such a developing process as in living languages, so their meaning are stable. Yes, here are a few examples of acid. In the past it was just one acid, nowadays we have a lot of acids. And the last note is very interesting, that acid is also has the meaning of in slang for LSD. Another advantage of Greek Latin terminology is the precise meaning and precise use of words is crucial, yes. And Greek and Latin words are shorter and more convenient than long descriptions in English. Another advantage is that knowledge of simple Greek roots can help in spelling a word more easily. For example, mononucleosis, we can divide it into separate words. It's easier to pronounce it. Conclusion, medical terminology based on Latin and Greek has several advantages. It's a continuity in time, continuity in space, used a lot in Western so-called scientific medicine. No or little ambiguity, Latin and Greek do not undergo changes, and Greek language is suitable for compound words. Anatomical terminology uses about 5,800 Latin terms. It means 3 of them are Latin, 1 is from Greek. Clinical terminology, it's based mostly on statistical classification of diseases, is not so uniform because the clinical subjects develop very quickly and the knowledge must be continually revised, and many English medical terms have Latin equivalents. And here is a text from Latin translated into English. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we should just go and try to deal with translating this from Latin into other languages. Okay, thank you very much for this sort of a classic insight into a classical context or ancient context of medical terminology. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a few minutes for questions, so if you have got any, please just, I'll running to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, which was part of it very much down my alley, talking about medical terminology. You talked about standardization, and you referred, as I remember, to the International Classification of Diseases and Anatomica. Are you familiar with the SNOMED system of the systematized nomenclature of medical terminology devised by the American Pathology Association? That seems to me to have become perhaps the reference when we talk about medical terminology being applied digitally, offering a complete systematic account of all terms related to the field of medicine and being sanctioned by national boards of health over many parts of the world. I think it would be a wonderful resource to apply in a teaching context. So I guess it was rather a comment than a question, but you of course feel free to comment.
It depends on the doctors or physicians what they decide to use. Once it's decided to use these two sets of terminology, this anatomica terminology plus this statistic, it was approved somewhere on some congresses that in Europe we will use this classification. It's not done just by our faculty. It's decision from larger institutions. Because anatomic terminology was codified several times, even now it's recodified, because some words are old-fashioned even in native language, and so they try to replace it with some. suitable, more suitable terms. But it's interesting. I will take the source just for my own purpose.
Okay, and we still have time for 1 or 2 short questions.
Olsztyn, Kraków, do you have any questions?
There is one question from Gdańsk. And Olsztyn. Yes?
No.
So go back to Gdańsk.
May I ask a question? We have problems with our students because our knowledge of Greek and Latin is rather low nowadays. Formerly 20 years or 50 years ago it was another case. But I think they have to introduce certain courses as you do now for our students in Germany and so on. Do you have the same problems with your students, knowing Latin or Greek enough? And then there is one question. What happens if you have another writing system? For example, how is it in Russian? You can transcript it into Cyrillic graphemes, I suppose. But you have a problem when it comes to Arabic or Chinese. You have a Chinese text. And how do they use those terms? I don't know. The idea came to me. I have to prove it. I have to find out how it is. For example, in the Arab world, from Morocco to the Gulf, except Syria, the training of medical doctors and pharmacists is in English or in French. So whenever you have a problem in Cairo, go to the next pharmacist, he knows English. But how is it written then when they write Arabic from this, and then suddenly you have the term. Is it Latin or is it some kind of Arabic? I have to think it over. In the Chinese, you have the Chinese text, and then you do it in English, and then you go on.
So I don't know what's the situation in these languages. As far as I know, that the Russians, they use phonetic transcription. They don't take the spelling, but they prefer phonetic transcription and use this. And Arabs, I don't know how do they do it. But maybe they cite the sources, how it was written in old Greek language or the sources. It depends on the type of study.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's very important for the students, for the learners, to divide this kind of terms, Latin or Greek terms, because you can not only remember where is the root, but you can also understand what is the procedure. For instance, all the suffixes, if you have the itis, it's always an inflammatory process, where if you have osis, and we have arthritis and arthrosis, so the osis is the degenerative process, and so you can bit by bit understand it's not just learning the terminology, which doesn't stay, at least at my young age, but it never really did stay, but I have to understand a little bit. So I think this way of handling it, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for the discussion, and now the time for our second plenary speaker, Lisa Montag from the University of Homa. I hope to pronounce it correctly. John, I'm sorry. And our guest speaker is specialising in medical and technical translation as well as in translation teaching. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this international meeting about medical translation. And hello to all our colleagues following us online. The title of my presentation is Patient-Centered Translation in Focus, Challenges and Opportunities. My aim is to reframe translating for patients within a translational medicine, personalized medicine, patient-centered care, and user-centered translation. Also to define provisionally patient-centered translation and start maybe mapping new territory. And also to identify some of the challenges and opportunities of patient-centered translation. So the first objective, I'll try to dive quickly into the discourse of personalized medicine, translational medicine, patient-centered care, and then I'll get to the point in which I can give a provisional definition of patient-centered translation, and then field for discussion, challenges and opportunities in which I hope to hear your opinions. So the first part will be looking at medical translation. I'll look at very briefly at a case study. And I'll define this current life I was mentioning, and then I will concentrate on patient-centered translation and challenges, opportunities, and discussion. Medical translation is a very broad field, as has already been shown in the previous talks. Biomedical research, development and approval of products, medical equipment, professional education, clinical practice, popularization through media, even fiction that contains medical knowledge are all part of medical translation. Researchers, health authorities, nurses, doctors, technicians, managers, university students, patients, general public, they all participate in medical communication, and as medical translators, we translate for all of these participants. They have different perspectives, they have different purposes, and they have different focuses on what medical knowledge is and what medical communication is. With some excellent exceptions, translating for patients has traditionally been undervalued and unfocused. And this is the main motivation for this presentation. Very briefly, I will tell you a case study that serves as a starting point. A few years ago, I was asked to translate a set of guides for patients, fact sheets for patients, for breast cancer patients in particular. This was a source text, a set of source texts coming from an American hospital. Okay? And the target audience, the target patients were well defined. But the brief came from the health authorities in this hospital. The result was, according to the commissioners of the translation, that the target text was too long, the target text was too difficult to understand, because the original guides were actually long and pretty difficult, pretty dense in a terminological sense. And the main difficulty in this translation brief was not specialized by medical knowledge, was not understanding the source text. It was not terminology. It was nothing to do with difficulty with neologisms and so on. It was not text conventions, because the text conventions of the original were clear. The main difficulty was the lack of knowledge about target patients' needs, preferences and expectations, and the lack of textual and discursive resources, for example, parallel texts in the target culture. So the translation was rejected on the grounds that it was too long and too difficult. It was a quick functional translation, perfectly fine, as far as traditional translation is normally understood, respecting precision, respecting terminology, respecting text conventions of the original and so on, and yet the quality was not met. So there are some initial questions I'd like to ask. Who decides and who should decide what is suitable for, needed by, preferred by specific groups of patients, the patients themselves? What ethical priorities or principles should guide us when translating for patients? As translators, on what grounds do we make decisions when translating or adapting texts for patients? What kind of assumptions do we make about our readers? Are they correct? Do we have a clear understanding of the target readership for which we are writing the translation? I mean, when we think of research genres, it's pretty clear what a researcher in the biomedical field is doing. She or he is trying to publish his work in an internationally peer-reviewed paper. But this is not the situation when we deal with patients. In other words, when we're translating research genres, we are very much researcher-centered as translators. We know what they want, and we know what their conventions are. We know we have access to a lot of resources, technological resources, textual resources, and so on. But it's not the same case when we're dealing with patients. How much do we know about the patient's information needs, their communication preferences, their cultural backgrounds, their perceptions, their feelings and emotions as well? Because according to different ages, we have different profiles of patients. According to different illnesses, we will have different perceptions and different points of view on language and communication. Now, I've noticed recently that from translational medicine, a discourse is emerging in which translation is very relevant. And this, I'm going to just to give you a few examples of this kind of discourse. This is from the European Patients Academy, the European Patients Forum. Translational medicine transforms the basic investigational achievements of medical biology into practical theory, technology and methods that will bridge laboratory and clinical practice. Translational medicine is focused on ensuring that proven strategies for disease treatment and prevention are eventually implemented within a patient population. So there is an emphasis of bridging, of creating a bridge between the lab and the clinic. And this is a new development. There's a very strong emphasis in which we may have a say. Translational medicine will encourage the flow of information from the lab to the clinic. In the same way, it should be encouraged from the clinic back to the lab. This means that translational medicine is bidirectional, encompassing bench to bedside factors which aim to increase the efficiency by which new therapeutic strategies developed through research are tested clinically, and bedside to bench factors which provide feedback about the application of new treatments and how they can be improved. So this means that communication is becoming paramount to develop new therapies, to develop new strategies. This is a nice example of the kind of flows that we're interested in within translational medicine. According to the European Society for Translational Medicine, it is an interdisciplinary branch of the biomedical field supported by three main pillars: bedside, and community. It's a highly interdisciplinary field, and the aim is to improve the global healthcare system significantly. According to the American Society for Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics, research that transforms scientific discoveries arising from the laboratory, clinical or population studies into new clinical tools and applications that improve human health by reducing disease incidence, morbidity, and mortality. Translational research fosters the multi-directional integration of basic research, patient-oriented research, and population-based research with a long-term aim of improving the health of the public. According to the American Society for Clinical Pharmacology again, translational medicine bridges across the discovery, development, regulation, and utilization spectrum. And if we look at this spectrum of discovery, development, regulation, and utilization, we identify some of the very important 10 genres that we normally deal with as medical translators. I'd like to focus the attention on the utilization part of the spectrum, where clinical guides, fact sheets for patients, informed consents, patient information leaflets, and maybe more genres in the future that will facilitate the flow from the clinic to the lab and from the lab to the clinic in this emerging paradigm of translational medicine. And this links with a second pillar of this framework in which I'm trying to situate patient-centered translation, which is personalized medicine. According to the National Health Service in England, personalized medicine is a move away from the one-size-fits-all approach to the treatment of care of patients with a particular condition, to one which uses new approaches to better manage patients' health and targets therapies to achieve the best outcomes in the management of a patient's disease or predisposition to disease. So again, the focus is on patients. The focus is on the results in the clinic. We are all unique as people, as persons, and as patients. And lifestyles and environment matter. When we talk about styles, of course, we can connect it with culture, we can connect it with social environment, other aspects beyond the biomedical classical categories. According to the European Commission, personalized medicine, many of our most common medicines are not effective in treating large numbers of patients, which means that they are supposed to help, and more than 6% of acute hospital admissions are caused by serious adverse reactions to medicines because they address to big numbers of patients. Moreover, healthcare costs across the European Union are rising due to population ages and chronic diseases become more prevalent. Personalized medicine addresses these challenges with tailor-made prevention and treatment strategies for individual or groups of individuals. And again here we have this notion of the individual, this notion of the very specific subgroup of patients around which communication has to be articulated in these emerging paradigms. As a result, patients receive the specific therapies that work best for them. And of course, these therapies are accompanied by text, by documentation, by information. Personalized medicine is a fast-growing market, and Europe's healthcare industry has the potential to build on its leading position, providing economic growth and jobs. And I think we are stakeholders in this new emerging paradigm. Although there is no universally accepted definition for personalized medicine, the Horizon 2020 Advisory Group has defined personalized medicine as a medical model using characterization of individuals' phenotypes and genotypes for tailoring the right therapeutic strategy. And I'm going to underline the idea of tailoring communication, tailoring texts, tailoring terminology. Or to determine the predisposition to disease and to deliver timely and targeted prevention. I'm going to underline target communication, targeted communication which is targeted to specific subgroups of patients. Well, these are more examples of this kind of discourse coming from personalized medicine, insisting on tailor healthcare, to tailor communication. Patients have to be matched to the best therapy so that the patient is treated with the right drug and the right dose at the right time. So you can imagine a new paradigm in which patient information leaflets are highly personalized even for individual patients or for very specific subgroups of patients beyond the dominant idea of having a standardized type of text which covers all needs. So what kind of opportunities does translational medicine in the first place and personalized medicine provide for translators? Well, the first one is facilitating the flow of information and knowledge, as we said before, from the clinic into the lab and from the lab into the clinic, dealing with targeted groups of patients, dealing with individualized diagnoses, prognosis, treatments, tailoring healthcare culturally and linguistically, and more that we will look at later on. And the third big area I want to cover in this quick tour in the discourse of these three elements is patient-centered care, which is another emerging force, another emerging drive in healthcare systems in different countries. And this is a summary of the 8 principles of patient-centered care. The first one is respect for patients' preferences. And of course, language plays a huge role here, and culture plays a huge role here. Second one is coordination and integration of care. The same patient may have needs from different specialists, and this requires integration and coordination of care. The third element is, of course, information and education. And again, here, writing and translation play a huge role. Information and education which is tailored to meet the needs of specific groups of patients. Physical comfort, emotional support, and again, the whole idea of the emotions and feelings in text for patients, as Professor Vidal has mentioned before, is paramount again. Involvement of family and friends, network around the patients, and how in many cases is the family and friends who mediate either linguistically or culturally, or just because of the fact that the patient is incapable, because of her disease, because of his disease, to deal with the information in the consultation. Continuity and transition and access to care in all senses of the word. I would like to add patient engagement in care, even patient access to their medical records and their ability to add or clarify information in the record. This sounds very revolutionary, but this is the way things are developing. Okay? In this process of empowering patients, shared decision making decisions with professionals. And for that, patients need, of course, education, need information, need to understand what is going on. Feedback from patients about healthcare, the possibility of patients feeding back into the system their own perceptions in order to improve the system. Availability of information on practices, on how, for example, an informed consent is carried out. Participation in research forums, like medical conferences in which patients involved in that particular theme or topic will be there and will give their opinion as patients. And something which is happening more and more, patients' narratives. Stories told by patients about their own individual experiences as patients. And this is very valuable information in a lot of diseases. So, patient-centered care, where the patient is right at the center of the communicative interactions is a movement away from doctor-centered care or medicine-centered care, in which the patient was a marginal, was a number, was a case, full stop. In patient-centered care, this conversation would summarize the ethos of the issue. I'm an expert on healthcare. I'm an expert on me and my life. So this is the new perspective. It's like a huge shift of perspective that we as translators need to take into account. So I'd like to underline these two dichotomies. The first one is system of expert knowledge. And in medical translation, this has been and is still a big focus, as Professor Pilgard explained in his talk, translating research papers, translating research in general for researchers and for the community of professionals. There would be systems of expert knowledge versus the world of life where patients live, which seems to be a world apart so far. And this idea of translational medicine, personalized medicine, and patient-centered care try to integrate. And there's another dichotomy I'd like to mention: the expert patient. The patient who's become an expert versus the lay person, who is in a very different position from the expert position. So this is a first attempt to define patient-centered translation. A kind of user-centered translation in which the target patient's perspective takes center stage as the main locus of translation criteria and translation choices. Patient-centered translation is aimed at achieving full comprehensibility, empathy, empowerment, and well-being of patients through adequate and effective grammatical, terminological, stylistic, textual, pragmatic means, as well as by non-verbal resources like images and other kind of non-verbal resources. Patient-centered translation takes into account the educational background, the clinical situation, their specific needs, the preferences in the presentation of information of both individual and well-defined subgroups of patients, moving away from this idea of one text for all patients. Patient-centered translation is emotionally supportive and culturally relevant and coherent. Intralingual translation is a fundamental component of patient-centered translation. It relies and depends on constant testing and feedback from real target patients. So we need to look at it from a very critical point of view. We need the real responses, the real answers, the real reactions of patients when reading our translations. So patient-centered translation is within patient-centered writing, which would be a more general concept, including non-translation processes. And that would be, in its turn, within patient-centered communication, including oral interaction and other types of interaction. And that would be within patient-centered care. Okay? And patient-centered care is very much within the framework of personalized medicine, as we saw before, and also is connected with translational medicine somehow. Probably more in the margins, but it's somehow, everything seems to be connected. So, this is another way of looking at patient-centered translation, coming from patient-centered writing, and of course, very much linked to patient-centered interpreting and mediation in hospitals. And actually, in some genres, like informed consent, you get written interaction, but you also get face-to-face oral interaction. So we need to integrate more modes and forms of discourse. So patient-centered translation, as I said before, comes from patient-centered care. It's part of medical translation. Okay, it's part of medical translation. I will link it to expert relay translation, and I would definitely link it with user-centered translation, which is a very new, emerging theory that tries to go beyond functionalism. I recommend this reading. Sultan et al., Rowledge, 2015, in which the authors, basically what they say is that, yes, corpus theory in translation studies is fine, but we need to go beyond that. We need to be more radical in that direction in order to respond and satisfy the needs of our real, not only clients, but basically readers of our patients. So the notion of patient-centered translation is grounded both in patient-centered healthcare, as we said, and in user-centered translation. It tries to ensure the needs of information, that the needs for information are met, that the cultural relevance and mediation of cultural values is ensured. It also ensures that the comprehensibility of the text is met, that the writing is an empathic writing, so that the patient, as a reader, feels as well as possible. And this is connected to the idea of therapeutic communication, therapeutic writing. It does not mean covering the truth. It means telling the truth, whatever the truth is, but with empathy, with compassion. Because patients, most of them are in difficult situations. Not all of them, but most of them are in difficult situations. And the emotional impact of something which has not been written mindfully and empathically can be bad for patients' health as well. This is a very interesting area of research, and we need to cooperate with psychologists, with sociologists, in order to understand all this much better. Okay? And ensuring that the tone of the target text is not distant or threatening and does not cause unjustified distress. Basically, for me, patient-centered translation has three big elements. The ethos of the patient-centered translation approach would be the ethical priorities of, for example, an informed consent. And Morton has worked a lot on informed consent and how how many difficulties there are for them to be understood properly. How patients sign informed consents without understanding anything at all. So the ethos would be patients have the right to understand what they sign in the case of informed consent. The ethos in a patient information leaflet would be the patient needs to be able to read that patient information leaflet without any big effort beyond what is really reasonable. So all the efforts should be on the side of the professional who's writing for them. The second element for me would be the logos, which is the factual information, which is the comprehensibility of the text, which connects with the usability of the text. Okay? And of course, here we would have notions like precision, classical notions like precision, classical notions like truth, okay, of the information contained in the text and so on. And finally, I will talk about the pathos of the text, which is the feelings and emotions triggered by the target text. And here the big notion here is empathy. And of course, empathy is a big issue in clinical communication. It has been researched in face-to-face communication, oral interaction, but there's a big void as far as written communication, written translation is concerned. How do we create empathy when writing our target text? Basically, the aim is adherence to treatment of patients, and that means cost effectiveness, shared decision making, satisfaction with the health system, and empowerment as patients, to become more visible, to become a full stakeholder in the whole process. And finally, this is summed up with the notion of well-being. So this would be the flow we find at the core of patient-centered translation. Logos, yes. Content, yes. Terminology, yes. But let's think about terminology from the pathos point of view. Let's think about terminology from the ethos point of view. What do patients need as far as terminology is concerned? Yes, they don't want technical terms full stop because they won't understand the message. But they don't want not to have access to terminology, but because they will need those technical terms sooner or later. So rejecting technical terminology is not enough. We need to understand that they are connected with other stakeholders, other participants in the whole process. And this is some of the results of a pilot study we did with patients as readers. Okay, I'll try to jump quickly to the challenges of patient-centered translation. Well, for me, patient-centered translation challenges important assumptions about text genres. For example, it challenges ideas about the informed consent. It challenges ideas about the fact sheet for patients and how much it is understood or it is not understood. It challenges important assumptions about the status and function of the source text. What's the role of the source text in patient-centered translation? Yes, it's the source of information, that's clear. It's the source of logos. But what about pathos and ethos in the target culture? Patient-centered translation challenges important assumptions about quality. We are facing another notion of quality of text for patients. Another challenge is that most source texts are not patient-centered yet. And when they are patient-centered, they still need to be tailored to the target patients in the target culture. And this tailoring is very specific. It's normally very, very concrete. Dealing with types of information, structure, terminology, tenor, register in new ways. We may need to rephrase, we may need to build up a different structure for a specific group of patients. Lack of empirical knowledge about specific subgroups of patients. How do adolescents who suffer cancer read texts? How do they express themselves? Lack of resources and established good practices for professional translators. This is very important. We have a lot of technological resources, textual resources, when translating research in general, okay? Or textbooks for university students of medicine. But what about resources, terminological resources, for translating for patients in this patient-centered context? Lack of training materials for translation students. In a recent reading experiment, we found out that reading formulae, which is one standard method to measure comprehensibility, readability of texts, are not an adequate tool for measuring comprehensibility. They just look at the number of syllables in a sentence, they just look at the density of terminology and so on, but they don't take into account other more qualitative, patient-centered elements. We also found out that expert knowledge and perception is not enough to detect some of the most important shortcomings patients face when reading texts. Because no matter how expert you are in that particular field, if you're not in the body of that patient, you cannot understand the effect of a particular word on that particular patient or a group of patients. Technical terminology hinders comprehension, yes, if it is presented in a blunt way, but patients want to have access to technical terminology in order to be able to establish a dialogue with health professionals and be able to read other genres which are not necessarily addressed to them directly. overall tone of the text can affect the way readers respond. In this experiment, we compared an original version that was used in a hospital with an improved version. And the readers didn't know which was which. They said that the improved version sounded more reassuring than the original version that sounded more threatening, more distant. Of course, the writers of that original version didn't mean to be threatening, or didn't mean to be, weakening of the patient's feelings. But that was the result. We need to look more into the consequences and less into the intentions of writing and translating. Some non-terminological lexical items can inadvertently be offensive and hurting for specific subgroups of patients. And emotional aspects play a crucial role and can, in fact, hinder comprehension, because many of those readers are in shock, they are in a specific situation in their therapeutic process, and so on. Finally, opportunities, new niches for professional activity in the era of automation. This is very difficult to be done by a machine. Google Translate won't do this for patients. Redesign the target language of critical genres for patients. New areas of inquiry for researchers. Okay. For example, looking at how empathy is built into texts. We have an example nowadays at my university. We're looking at clinical communication from this point of view in order to create materials and methodologies that will improve interaction between patient and doctors. And I'm finishing now. Feedback from patient-centered writing. We can, as translators, receive feedback from patient-centered writing, patient-centered communication, patient-centered care. Translation, I'm going to say, new resources, patient narratives, video materials. There's no time to go into it. So, conclusions: being aware of and responding to new developments in medicine and healthcare is important for us as translators. Expanding the field of medical translation beyond system of expert knowledge and developing, a new kind of expertise, which is how to translate, how to write, and how to communicate with patients. Responsibility, proactive attitude, an empirical approach. From the implied reader, which is the traditional category in these personalities, to real patients in real contexts. Work closely with patients and medical professionals and participating in the construction of a more humanized medicine and healthcare by assuming emerging challenges and adopting new roles as translators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that this patient-centered approach requires a huge amount of cooperation on the part of the other side of the barricade, that's doctors. There's much to be done, I think. Ladies and gentlemen, we have some time for discussion. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very informative presentation. And I think, as translators, we always want to know our target public. So this is really very important. And I have one question, but I have first two comments, maybe just a piece of information. At the Geneva University Hospital, there is a section which is called the quality of life. Now, when you hear about the quality of life, you think it's something very positive, but actually this is concerned always people who are at the end of their life, more or less. And once we had to translate a questionnaire for these people, and we were working in a group together where you specialists, you have the patient in the middle, and strangely enough, the patient narrative there was that, I mean, you have Mr. and Mrs. everybody, yeah? So they are not all knowledgeable, and that's why a priori as a translator you would think, well, they want to have some kind of vulgarized general medical knowledge, but not at all exactly what you showed. They want to have their terms because they live with these kind of technical terms, but the rest, the empathy, the pathos, all this has to be taken care of, and it was a very fruitful experience, and I just want to share this with you. And the second piece of information, I don't know if you are familiar with Professor Ilona Kickbusch, who is now advising Mrs. Merkel for this Berlin G20 medical setting. She gives classes in Geneva in an institute called Health Diplomacy, and they also deal with all this. So that's my just comment. And the other thing is, how long do you take for the training in this field? Because obviously you have specialized in this field, and I would be very much interested to know how long and where you integrate this type of training at your university. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I must say that this type of training hasn't been implemented quite yet. I'm talking from a more conceptual point of view, and from more research point of view. We are actually doing research in this area of patient-centeredness and clinical communication. But I think, as far as I can see, the training of medical translators at my university, where I run a master's course in medical translation, in specialized translation modules, where we ask students to translate highly specialized texts. Before they get to the highly specialized text, they go through more popular kind of genres, and that would be a good space for them to develop this patient-centered approach to translation. Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any questions from Gdańsk or Krakow or Toruń?
Hello, a question from Krakow.
You're most welcome.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for your inspiring and very interesting, informative presentation, your lecture. My question concerns an issue that is much too large for a short answer. I realize that, and perhaps we would need to have another conference on that. But I'm interested in your opinion. And the issue is as follows. In the context of humanized translation, personalized translation, your idea of ethos, how is, to those notions, how is the issue of translators' objectivity related to, and devoicing translator from the process in a way? Meaning, on the one hand, well, it's not perhaps a collision, but still some diversity in approach between a translator that is supposed to be objective and a translator that is supposed to be compassionate towards his or her recipient. So I would be interested in your opinion on the issue of translators' objectivity in the context that you presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. My first response would be, you have to be objective from the point of view of logos, of the biomedical information contained in the text. Yeah? That would be my ethos as a translator. But if I adopt a perspective which is patient-centered when translating for patients, and all of us adopt perspectives, whether we want it or not. If I adopt it with awareness, consciously, then I will try to find a way to transmit the same biomedical information using a pathos and an ethos that suits the patient's needs, the target patient's needs, the target patient's preferences, and so on, instead of replicating a source text that, from the point of view of pathos and ethos, has shortcomings, no matter how solid it is from the point of view of logos. That's why I would stick to the logos. I would be objective with the logos, and I would be more intersubjective, if I may use this expression. I would establish a dialogue with my target audience in order to make decisions in the translation that are in the direction of patient-centeredness, if my position as a translator is patient-centered. I don't know if that's enough. It's a very big question, as you said, and I'll think about it carefully. But this would be my first response.
Thank you very much. Do you, if I may, do you have a feeling that the boundary between logos and ethos is not really possible to be a strict, very definitive boundary?
Well, yes, the boundaries between logos, ethos, and pathos are not very strict, but what we have inherited as far as giving information to patients is a model in which the expert in biomedicine writes texts which contain the right kind of information, yes, no doubt about that, but lack the sensitivity of the reader. So my idea is, in patient-centered translation, adding a new value from translation, which would be more sensitivity to how that information is conveyed to subgroups of patients. What's the point in talking about, I don't know, any disease to children in a way that they won't understand, or no matter how solid that biomedical information is? What's the point of writing to mental patients, schizophrenic patients, in a way that they won't understand? I mean, we could explore a huge diversity of subgroups of patients in which tailoring is so important in order for them, first of all, to understand the biomedical information, and second, to progress in their therapeutic process, in the way of adherence to treatment, in the way of satisfaction, in the way of empowering them, and finally the way of well-being, of feeling well when communicating.
Thank you very much.
Krakow, thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are closing this session, so thank you very much for the participation.
Very limited time.
Yes, I know. It's just interesting lecture, but I'm also a conference interpreter, medical field, both in veterinary medicine and human medicine. And this patient-centered approach, not conference interpreting, but perhaps consecutive interpreting, it's very interesting, and I think it's the question between objectivity and impartiality. You have to be impartial, but when you have to convey the message, as you have mentioned, it both applies to translation and interpretation in an empathetic way, in a compassionate way, you are losing partly the objectivity, but I don't think it's wrong. You still can be impartial, right? Conveying the knowledge, and it's very important. It was in fact very interesting for me from the translation point of view, but also from the interpretation. And it's really nice, and you may convey it, though you've been talking about it on a conceptual level, it will be the critical point for interpretation as well, but it was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I actually think that we have to learn a lot from interpreters and mediators, because you have dealt with these problems of empathy far more than we have done in written translation. So we need more dialogue with interpreters and hospital mediators. Because you're very much aware of what your role is. Are you neutral? Are you advocating for the patient? And we need to make those decisions as well as translators, written translators. Thank you.
And now, really, thank you very much. Thank you for participating in this session. Krakow, Olsztyn and Traveling, thank you very much for this session. Now we are going to have a lunch break and we will see each other again or one another again at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, before you go, everybody was thanking everybody. Thank you, Rimwana, Student Research Club, for your help. Thank you, interpreters. And now, for our lunch break, we're going to split. I'm going to take you speakers to the building next to us, neighboring building. All the other participants, please have your lunch on the 3rd floor, just where we had our coffee break. And you will also find the info stand about traineeship and living commission. Is there anything else I should say? No. Okay, so see you at 2 o'clock. Yeah, that's it.
Przepraszam, miałam takie pytanie. Pani wszystko nagrywa.